dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yep, what's good, original crew, man? We're back, baby. Got another round of top 3 places you can't go, and for some odd reason, people always go where they don't supposed to go. You know why? The human race, we are so hard-headed. We ignore all the signs. But people who win anyways, man. Part 15. Oh, Lord, another round.
Yep.
Another round. Let's get these notes situated. You ready? Why are you looking at me like that? Because I'm just like, bro, it's just
I'm ready, yeah.
It's just another round of, man, like, just tragic, bro.
I'm ready.
Hopefully we got some survivor stories. But typically, sometimes, it's very seldom we do, though. Very seldom.
Those are the ones I like.
But, hey, man, with that being said, before we get into it, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want to first support. All you have to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals,
like it with a thumbs up.
But let's go. Let's hop into it. Let's check it out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go.
Today, we're going to learn about 3 places that you're not supposed to go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please bring the like button to Komodo Island to go apple picking in the restricted section and secretly tape a stake to the back of their shirt. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2012, 62-year-old Jose Molena was living in Los Angeles. He was the father of 6 children, and he had been working at Bumblebee Foods for the past 5 years. One of Jose's responsibilities at the plant was loading the massive industrial oven that was 54 inches wide by 36 feet long with these huge pallets of tuna in cans. The oven was designed to sterilize the actual can itself and process the tuna inside of them. At 4 a.m. on October 11th, Jose arrived at the Santa Fe Springs plant where he worked, and his supervisor immediately tasked him with loading a particular oven. So Jose left and got 12,000 pounds of tuna in cans, and he put them on this dolly and he wheeled it over to the oven. He walked over and opened up the oven door, and he looked inside and he saw there was a loose chain in the back. And so even though he knew he wasn't supposed to go inside of the oven for obvious reasons, he knew he could fix that chain in just a couple of minutes. And so he decided he would just go in there and get it done. A couple of hours later, a supervisor asked the other workers if they had seen Jose, and no one had. And so they searched the inside of the plant. He was nowhere to be seen. His workstation at that oven had been cleaned up. They called out to him on the intercom to come up to the office, but he didn't show up. They went outside and they found his car was still parked in the parking lot. When they went back inside, everybody was just stumped about where Jose could have gone. And so they searched the building one more time, and then finally one of the workers said, "The only place we haven't looked is inside the oven he was last seen loading." And so they turned off the oven, but they had to wait 30 minutes for it to cool down before it was safe to go inside. And when they finally opened up the door, they found Jose pressed up against the inside of the door, trying to get out. He had been cooked alive. Earlier, when Jose had gone inside of the oven to fix that loose chain, he had left all 12,000 pounds of this tuna sitting on a pallet dolly right outside the entrance to this oven. And so another coworker had been walking down the row of ovens, and the door to the oven swings out, and so it would have blocked his view to look inside of the oven. And this worker saw this huge pallet of tuna sitting right outside, ready to be pushed directly into the oven. And so he assumed Jose must have stepped away to go to the bathroom. And so thinking he was doing him a favor, he walked over and pushed the pallets right inside, shut and locked the door without ever seeing Jose. And Jose, who was at the back of the oven, was probably caught off guard by the pallets suddenly coming in, and they boxed him in. He could not have ran to the front to get out in time, and it was so loud inside of the plant that even if Jose had been yelling, "Hey, I'm in here," it's unlikely the other coworker would have heard him. Once Jose's coworker turned on the oven he was inside of, it would not have immediately heated up to lethal temperatures. In fact, it was a fairly gradual heating process up to 270 degrees over a 2-hour period. And the human body can survive at 200 degrees or higher for up to 10 minutes. but at 212 degrees, your blood will actually boil and that would kill you. Which means Jose would have had the time to fully recognize the situation he was in. And unfortunately, there was no kill switch inside of the oven and there was no emergency exit. And so Jose just forced himself along the edge of the oven, past all the pallets to the front door, and banged on it until he slowly cooked to death. The deputy district attorney that prosecuted Bumblebee Foods in the lawsuit that followed this case said this was the worst circumstances of death he had ever witnessed. Bumblebee Foods paid Jose's family $1.5 million. They also paid $3 million to upgrade all of their industrial ovens.
Oh, that's the second story we done heard of somebody being... probably not even the second, just second in a row. Are hearing people being cooked alive. You know how tragic that is?
Yeah.
Why are you singing hymns?
Because that's what it makes me want to do. Because I just can, like, feel, like, I don't know. Like, just to imagine the suffering.
Most people can't even bear the heat outside.
Like, right?
When it's 100 degrees outside, you be, oh, it's hot, bro. We gotta go in the house.
It's like...
So just imagine on the job and working and you being put in... Man.
Yeah.
That's horrible, man.
Rest in peace, Jose, because that's terrible. That is a horrible, horrible, horrible...
That's a horrible way to go. I don't care what nobody say, bro. That's one of the tops, being cooked alive to the point where your blood is literally boiling. So, and you slow cooking too.
That's a slow, painful.
It ain't one of them. It's like,
yeah.
I wonder, did they upgrade to putting kill switches in
the inside? I would hope so.
I would hope so, but a lot of people, a lot of corporations cut corners with those things because it's so expensive. So,
yeah, always trying to save $1, huh?
Yeah.
Jacob Cockle always loved the water. He grew up in a town called Penzance in the UK, and he spent virtually all of his time surfing at one of their beaches. By the time he was 10 years old, he started skipping school to go surfing and started getting in a lot of trouble for that. But despite his parents' and his teachers' frustrations with him, there was always one person that had his back and totally understood him, and that was his older sister, Grace. They were so close, they developed their own special language they talked to each other in, and Jacob used it so much that people actually thought he had a speech problem. But when Jacob was 17, his life was turned upside down when Grace was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she died very quickly after that. This had a profound impact on Jacob. It was like his entire view of the world had totally changed overnight, and he began to believe that Grace's energy had been transferred to him, and that it was now his duty to live for the two of them. And so what this translated to is Jacob began taking lots and lots of risks because he felt like he didn't want to pass up opportunities. He wanted to live life to the fullest, even if it was a little bit reckless. In addition to loving the water, Jacob also loved photography. And so with this new risk-taking attitude, he began doing these water-based stunts and filming himself in the process. Things like surfing in storms, or leaping off of buildings into fairly shallow water, or diving to dangerous depths on a breath hold. And Jacob loved it. He loved taking these risks. He loved filming himself taking these risks. And so he decided this was going to be his career. He was going to be a world-famous photographer that specialized in dangerous photos and films. And so Jacob got this big piece of paper and he put it on his bedroom wall, and with black marker he wrote himself a reminder: I will become a world-famous photographer and I will let nothing stand in my way. Basically, he was prepared to go to any length to get the shots that he needed to get. And this intense attitude worked. By his early 20s, he had won major awards with National Geographic and the Sunday Times. He was also a regular contributor to surf magazines where he almost always got the cover shot. Most of his award-winning pictures were taken of the sea in its most violent and turbulent forms. Like the shot of a fishing boat coming back into port in a large swell won a competition that put it all over the London Underground. Or this shot he took, which is off the coast of Sumatra out in the middle of the ocean, as Jacob and his friend are right in front of the supertanker that's bearing down on both of them, and his friend is surfing off the wake caused by the supertanker. So a very dangerous picture to take, but it won an award that was run by The Guardian. The money Jacob earned from these competitions, he spent on improving his photography equipment. If he was ever given a physical prize, like a brand new TV, he would just give it away to his friends, because all Jacob was really focused on was going out and living life to the fullest and taking crazy chances and capturing those experiences on film. And one crazy experience that he had always wanted to capture on film actually took place right in his hometown of Penzance. A very strong whirlpool would appear a few times a year in a harbor that was right near his childhood home. It was just a quirk of engineering designed to keep the harbor from silting up. At high tide, the water would come in and it would hit this quay wall, and at the bottom of the quay wall was a tunnel that fed into this other pool. And so that would fill up with water, and then when the tide retreated during low tide, the water in the harbor would drain out and the water from the pool would slowly filter out back through this tunnel, pushing the silt and sand out of the harbor. But sometimes when the water came into the harbor during high tide, it would come in so quickly it would build up against the quay wall and it wouldn't drain fast enough down through that tunnel into the pool. And so just like in your bathtub, if you pull the plug when it's full, you'll see a whirlpool form as the water is sucked down the drain. The same thing would happen at this quay wall as all this water is being forced down and sucked through this pipe. It would create this huge whirlpool that you could see on the surface from the quay wall. And even though this whirlpool only formed a couple of times a year, it was so dangerous. There were caution signs all around the edge of the harbor and on the quay wall telling people to stay out of the water. But in his mid-20s, Jacob ignored those signs and he started jumping into this whirlpool every time it formed. And he was able to kind of swirl around the outside and he would film it inside and just on top, and he would upload his videos to YouTube and they would get millions and millions of views. They were totally beautiful and terrifying at the same time. On May 28th, 2013, when Jacob was 28 years old, he noticed that the whirlpool was back in his hometown and he wanted to go out and film inside of it again. And so he ran to his friend David's house and he asked him to, hey, come down to the harbor and film me inside of this whirlpool. And so by the time David got his stuff together and made it to the quay wall, he looked down and he saw Jacob was already in the whirlpool swirling around. David also noticed that Jacob was wearing a rubber horse head mask, and he told David the reason he was doing it is because it would be more eye-catching on YouTube. So David leaned over the wall and began filming Jacob as he swirled around this whirlpool in his horse mask making neighing sounds, and at some point Jacob stopped and he swam away from the whirlpool, but you could see the pull of the whirlpool was very strong because even with flippers on, Jacob really struggled to swim away from this whirlpool. But he was in good spirits about it and he was laughing with David and saying how when he first jumped in, he was actually pretty scared of this whirlpool. It's definitely the strongest one he had been in over at this quay wall. And David would say, yeah, I can tell from up here, that one's really strong. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, David and Jacob kind of joked back and forth about the strength of the whirlpool, and Jacob would put his mask back down and swirl around inside of the whirlpool, then get out again. And then towards the end of the video, Jacob yells up to David that he only has one more thing in mind that he wants to do with the whirlpool. He wants to dive down below and film it from underneath. And so he asks David to hand down his camera. David hands it down, and you see Jacob adjusting his camera, and then he dives below the surface to begin filming this whirlpool. And so David's up on the top watching Jacob, and he's very familiar with Jacob. He knows he does things like this. He knows he has a great breath hold. But after a couple of minutes, when he doesn't reemerge, David gets scared and starts yelling for him. And when he still doesn't come up, David turns and runs to the other side of the quay wall and looks over that railing towards the pool side, and he can see the water is still rushing into the pool, and there's no sign of Jacob. And so he ran back and forth a couple of times and he didn't see Jacob until finally he went back to the pool side and he saw Jacob down below. He was lying face down in the water. So David ran down and waded out to him, but it was already too late. Jacob had drowned. The reason Jacob was able to swirl around at the top of this whirlpool and not get pulled under is because he had a wetsuit on, and wetsuits are buoyant. But as you go underneath the water, the deeper you go, the water pressure pushes against your wetsuit and it reduces the overall buoyancy of your wetsuit. And so when Jacob dove down into this whirlpool, the pressure pushed against his suit, he lost his buoyancy, and then he got caught up in the current of this very strong whirlpool, and he was pulled slowly down to the bottom. And so he probably fought as much as he could to try to get out of there, but he couldn't, and eventually was forced into that tunnel underneath the quay wall, and he was under there until he drowned, and then he was eventually spit out the other side.
Oh, because I was like, how? And you can actually find this video on the on YouTube.
Yeah.
That is crazy, bro. Like you can, because one of them Jacob's last piece, Whirlpool hitman. Dang, bro.
That's sad.
I see this at the end of the day, on some real spill. He lived his life the way he wanted to live his life.
Yeah.
He went out enjoying the life. I'm just enjoying life the way he always enjoyed it, and carefree and doing what he wanted to do. That's sad and tragic, though. And I guess supposedly he did this often, you know?
Yeah. It's like that bittersweet thing. Like, he... Oh, that's sad.
But yeah, they got what we just watched was a little quick, like, what was it, 30 seconds version of it. But they got a whole 30-minute video of it if you want to check that out. All you gotta do is type in Jacob Whirlpool, and it got millions and millions of views. So,
but yeah,
man.
But like you say, yeah, he was doing something that he loved to do. But it's just kind of like, I guess like you can look at it on that side, the brighter side, but it's just still like tragic. And it's like me, like for like a friend having to be there, like and watch that happening.
And there's nothing I can do.
For me, that is just so heartbreaking. Yeah.
R.I.P. Jacob,
yeah.
bro.
R.I.P. to Jacob.
In July of 1988, 18-year-old Adana and her husband, Jay Dickenson, were living in Anchorage, Alaska, just 1 month after getting married in Nevada. Jay, who had lived in Alaska for several years before Adana joined him, had taken up an interest in something called placer mining, which is basically mining riverbeds for minerals like gold. And as soon as Adana moved in, she picked up the hobby as well. The area they mined for gold was south of Anchorage in Cook Inlet. Jay owned a gold claim there. Over the years, Jay had found it to be very cumbersome just getting to Cook Inlet. Even though it was just south of Anchorage, the roads forced him to drive all the way around the inlet before being allowed in. However, he had discovered a shortcut. During low tide in the inlet, one of the two northern waterways that fed into the inlet, called the Turnagain Arm, would be completely dried up and it would turn into this huge open mudflat. And so Jay could leave Anchorage, go south, leave the highway at the Turnagain Arm, and drive directly over and across the mudflats and reach his gold claim in half the time. On the evening of July 14th, the young couple decided that the next day they wanted to go gold mining. And so Jay checked the tides of the inlet to see what the status would be for the next day, and he was pleasantly surprised to see that very early the next morning there would be a low tide. Perfect for them. And so the next day, the couple got up at sunrise, they hopped in their Jeep, and they started heading south. They left Anchorage, they hopped on the highway, and they went south all the way to the access point to Turnagain Arm, and they looked out in front of them, and sure enough, it's completely low tide, and it's ready for them to drive over. As they turned off the highway and drove down the small access road that brought them to the actual mudflats, they passed by a series of signs telling them not to go on the mudflats. But Jay had done this dozens of times without any incident, and Deanna, she'd done it only a couple of times, but both times it had been no big deal, so neither of them paid any attention to the cautionary signs. Soon they were rolling across the mudflats on their way to Jay's gold claim, but on their way, their Jeep suddenly got stuck in the mud. And Deanna, she hopped out, she went to the back of the Jeep and began pressing as Jay pushed down on the accelerator. The Jeep eventually lurched forward and was free of the mud, but Deanna was actually now stuck in the mud because as she pushed, she drove both of her legs down deep into this mud. She tried to pull herself out, she couldn't do it, and so Jay hopped out of the Jeep, walked around the mud, and got to his wife and began pulling on her. He couldn't get her out, but he told her he had a good idea. He went back to his Jeep and he got his dredge that he was going to use to try to look for gold, and he pushed it down into the mud and began sucking up the mud around one of her legs. And he figured if he just created enough of an air pocket by sucking out enough mud, she could pull that leg out, and then he could do the same thing with the other leg. And although it was a slow process, it was working, and slowly but surely they managed to get one of her legs out of the mud right as the 38-degree water began coming in because tide was starting to come in. Neither of them were panicking because the dredge was clearly working, and if they could just get her other foot out, it wouldn't matter that the water was starting to come in. They would be able to get back to land, back to the highway before they got caught in the high tide. And so he put the dredge down next to her other leg, and he began pulling the mud out, and it was working, but then the dredge broke, and he couldn't fix it. And Deanna's starting to panic, Jay's starting to panic. He puts the dredge back in the Jeep, he gets a shovel, and he runs back to his wife and begins frantically trying to dig her out, but he can barely move the mud. It's like it's cement. And that's actually the reason why there's so many signs around these mudflats telling people to not go on them. Because there's a very small window of time between low tide and high tide where the ground goes from being solid and you can drive a car on it to being very soupy, and it's very easy to get stuck in it. But before the tide completely comes back in again, it re-hardens. And so if you're stuck in the mud and you don't get out again before it hardens again, you will remain stuck in the mud and 30 feet of water will come in on top of you. And so Deanna's trying to pull her leg out and she's panicking, and Jay is doing everything he can to try to get down there and get her foot out, but the ground's hardened at this point. Her leg is completely trapped inside of the mud and the water is starting to come in faster and faster and faster. Jay told her he had to run back to the highway to try to get some help. He couldn't take his Jeep. There was too much water that had come in. It's now up to their knees, and so their Jeep's worthless. And so Jay is running away from Adana, who's screaming for help. She's trying to get her leg out. There's nothing he can do. And so he's running through the water. He gets up to the highway and he manages to flag down some motorists, and he pleads with them to please come out into the water and help me get my wife out. She's stuck in the mud. And they look out and she's flailing around and screaming, and the water is now up to her waist. And so two of these motorists actually run down into the water with Jay and risk their own lives to try to get Adana out. Meanwhile, another motorist took off for a nearby cafe where he could alert authorities that someone is trapped and they need someone out there right now. Very quickly, the fire department and the state troopers arrived on scene, and they look out and they see the motorists and Jay trying to pull Adana out, and the water has crept even higher up on her body. She's screaming, she's panicked, and Mike Opalka, who's one of these state troopers, he immediately ran over to the fire department and he got this big rubber tube and he charged into the water and ran out to Adana and grabbed her and said, everything's going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here. And he gave her the tube and he says, you need to start breathing through this. The water's going to be over your head soon. And so Adana, who's shaking because she's hypothermic and because she's terrified, she takes this tube and she's clutching it as the other rescue workers are running down with all their equipment to try to get her out. And then not that long after that, the tide had come in to the point where it was over her head, and all they could see of Adana was this rubber tube she was keeping out of the water. But unfortunately, every attempt the rescue workers made failed, including getting a helicopter in and attaching a harness to Adana and trying to pull her out that way. Nothing worked. The first responders and the motorists and everyone stayed with Deanna, holding on to her and trying to pull her out. But at some point, the water was too cold and it was getting too deep, and they could not stay out there with her long enough. Michael Polka, the state trooper, was the last one out there with her, and he was struggling to keep his head over the water as he's still trying to pull her up. And at some point, he noticed the tube she had been breathing in popped up on the surface with both ends exposed, so it had come out of her mouth. And so he fumbled with it, but his hand was so cold from the water, he couldn't really grip it. He tried to reach down to give her the hose, but she was flailing and panicking, and she couldn't get the hose. She could not breathe through it, and at some point she went still, and Mike knew there was nothing he could do. She was gone, and so he let go of her, and being hypothermic himself, he barely was able to swim back to the shore and get out and go up onto the highway with the others. And there they sat for the next 6 hours as they waited for the tide to come all the way in and then go all the way out again and loosen up to the point where they could go out and retrieve Deanna's body. Unfortunately, had authorities been alerted to Deanna's situation a little bit earlier, they could have got a special water pump out to the mudflats, and it would have been able to get her out even if the mud was hardened. But by the time that pump arrived on scene, it was already too late. The water was well over Deanna's head and she had already let go of the tube. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know.
Ballen, we ain't looking for no secrets in a video like this.
I sure don't be looking for the secrets. And rest in peace to Deanna.
Fuck.
That's what? Wow.
A nice time turns so tragic.
Something that y'all do, like, y'all done before. You know?
Just trying to enjoy. Y'all been married for what he said, a year? The fuck?
Yeah.
That's insane, bro. Like, I'm left speechless. That's fucking insane.
Yeah, that sucks. Especially, like, with all, like, the attempts of, like, everyone trying to help and still, like...
Nothing they can do.
Nothing they can do. You just kind of have to, like... You know that, okay, this is it. You just gotta weigh it out. That's devastating.
Facts, man. Yeah. RIP to her, man, for sure, man. But y'all spam us up in the comments. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts and opinions about it in the comment section down below for us. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is we are. We out.
Ain't no time to kick it, got a stack of flip for my folks. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my partner.